Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to our self-knowledge course. Today we arrive at a very fascinating subject. This is lecture number 33 in the cycle of 50 conferences, which form the first stage Phase A of this course. The purpose of these studies is to provide us with the essential tools to awaken our consciousness and truly discover who we are. In this session, we will focus on two remarkable universal laws, the law of octaves and the law of entropy. The objective of this topic is to understand how these two laws operate, how they influence and condition us, and most importantly, how by becoming aware of them, we can learn to use them in our favor. Through the wise application of musical octaves and by learning to overcome entropy, the force that constantly pulls us to conform, to become like the rest of humanity, we can keep ourselves from descending on the path toward the intimate self-realization of our being. In this way, we may reach that great goal within a single lifetime. Let us begin by explaining the law of octaves. This law shows us the path of ascent. It reveals where we become stuck, why that happens, and how we can continue progressing toward the ultimate goal. It also helps us understand how the laws of force operate in nature. The law of octaves, also called the current of sound or the current of life, is one and the same principle. If we look at the musical scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, we see that it consists of 7 notes. To go from a lower do to a higher do, it is necessary to rise to another octave. We call this scale the current of life because all human beings are directly involved in it and subjected to it. When we begin singing a scale, do, re, mi, we soon encounter the first pause between mi and fa. Then we continue with fa, sol, la until we reach another pause between la and si. Finally, the note si stands on its own, and to move from si to the higher do requires a third pause, which leads us into the next octave. This means that within a single scale, there are 3 pauses, and this very same process repeats itself in all the events of life. We discover that the same 3 pauses appear whenever we attempt to move something from a lower level to a higher one. To advance, we must learn how to give ourselves conscious impulses that allow us to break through these pauses. These impulses, which push us forward and enable us to overcome those pauses, are what we call shocks. Take, for example, the creation of a company or business. To begin, we need an initial impulse, such as motivation, capital, or the resources to start. That is the first shock. This initial shock allows us to climb the first 3 notes of the scale, helping us to launch the business and establish it in the market. Yet inevitably, after the initial push, after buying equipment, raw materials, and hiring workers, we face a pause, a moment of stagnation, often caused by the difficulty of gaining ground in the marketplace. If when we reach this pause, we fail to give the business a second shock, perhaps through further investment, new contacts, or finding clients, the progress will stall. Gradually, the enterprise may weaken and eventually collapse back to its starting point. But if we do give that second shock, the business rises further along the scale, reaching a new level where it begins to produce and generate profit. This corresponds to climbing the next 3 notes. Sooner or later, however, new obstacles arise, such as established competition or rising costs of materials. Again, to advance further, we must apply another shock and then another, until the business reaches stability and success. The same principle applies in human relationships. When we examine them closely, we see how those 3 pauses naturally appear. Many relationships fail simply because they cannot overcome one of these pauses. Thus, the law of octaves can be observed in everything. It governs the micro level of daily life as well as the macro level of our existence itself, whose supreme purpose is nothing less than the self-realization of the being. The ascent through levels of consciousness also follows this same law. On our path toward fulfilling the true purpose of our existence, we inevitably encounter pauses, moments of stagnation where progress seems to halt. To move beyond them, we must learn to give ourselves conscious impulses, or shocks, so that we can continue ascending and achieve the self-realization of our being within this very lifetime. In our own lives, the very first shock happens at birth, at the instant we take our first breath. That first inhalation marks the definitive entry of the spark of life into the new body. During the 9 months of gestation, this spark remains connected to the physical form through the silver cord, but it is with that first breath that true entry occurs. This initial shock grants us the first 3 musical notes, do, re, and mi. These correspond to the physical body, represented by do, the vital body, represented by re, and the soul principle we all possess, in which 97% of our essence remains trapped, represented by mi. All of this is accompanied by the personality we develop in order to function within the physical world. With these 3 notes, we grow, we mature, we may achieve material or personal success, we age, and we die, yet without ever attaining anything truly real or transcendental. Each lifetime represents an opportunity to work toward self-realization, but to do so, we must give ourselves a second shock that will allow us to continue ascending the notes of our existence. From the moment we reach me, we either climb upward or we slip back to the starting point. If we fail to ascend, physical death comes, and by the law of return, we are brought back to the beginning again. This is the common destiny, to pass through life without ever discovering its purpose. Under the law of entropy, we all end up alike in the cemetery, returning again and again in different physical bodies until we exhaust our 108 existences, our allotted opportunities with a human body. The vast majority of humanity never transcends that first pause. We remain absorbed in the meaningless pursuit of pleasures and successes, constantly trying to escape pain and adversity. This is what Genesis refers to as the third-day men, souls fascinated by mere existence, hypnotized and unaware of the true reason for their being. To rise beyond that first pause, we must receive the impulse that becomes our second shock. This is the force that enables us to break through stagnation and continue our ascent toward the being. We give ourselves this second shock by receiving objective knowledge, the living knowledge of the 3 factors of the revolution of consciousness: psychological death, spiritual birth, and sacrifice for humanity. Through these principles, we discover that our existence holds a far greater purpose than we ever imagined. Yet very few succeed in finding this pure knowledge amid the countless pseudo-esoteric theories and schools that surround us. As it is said, out of 1,000 who seek for it, 1 finds it. If we are that one among 1,000 who discovers objective knowledge within a single lifetime, 2 paths open before us. Either we practice it and continue moving forward, or we reduce it to a mere belief. Some receive this knowledge and take the path of the believer, holding it as just another theory without applying it. In doing so, they fail to use it as an impulse, as a shock, to climb to the next notes. Out of 1,000 who find it, only 1 follows it. Only a very few begin to practice the knowledge. But those who do, through experimentation and verification, receive that second shock, which enables them to begin advancing in the awakening of their consciousness and in the creation of their internal bodies. Those who take the path of practice, the path of direct application, are the ones who begin to ascend through the notes fa, sol, and la. Through the conscious use of the sexual force, they regenerate the first 2 bodies and bring into existence their astral, mental, and causal bodies. By doing so, they become true human beings with a genuine inner constitution. These are the ones who definitively create their human soul and become what is called the men of the 6th day, beings made in the image and likeness of God. This is the inner Genesis, the creation from the waters, which corresponds to the great work of ascension through the first mountain, the creation of the solar bodies. But it is precisely at this point that the second pause appears. The first part of the work is being completed. Yet, as the process of creating the causal body begins, the great trial of choice presents itself, the test of deciding the path. Here, one must choose between the path to nirvana and the direct path. Nirvana is a most tempting road. It offers great rewards for the hard labor accomplished so far, including the right to live for hundreds or even thousands of years in the paradises of nirvana. But at that stage, one has only just attained the level of man, and sooner or later one must return again to the wheel of samsara to start the path once more. Those who take the nirvanic path betray their inner Christ, because only the direct path allows that force, the Christ, to be born within us. Only Christ can elevate us from men to supermen, to resurrected masters. At this stage, about 70% of the consciousness has been liberated. Nearly all of our visible moon, the more obvious defects, has been dissolved. Yet the hidden part remains. All the defects related to the invisible moon and the causal eyes, the 7 seeds of the ego, are still alive. Only the Christ, through the work of the second mountain, can annihilate these deeper elements in the infradimensions of the earth, thereby releasing the entirety of our essence. Unfortunately, the vast majority choose nirvana. Out of 1,000 initiates who reach this point, 999 take that path. In this is fulfilled the third part of Christ's teaching. Out of 1,000 who follow me, one is mine. Those who instead choose to do the will of the Father and take the direct path gain the right to unite with their divine soul, represented by the Buddhic body. At that moment, a perfect union occurs, the marriage of the human and the divine within us. The human soul, symbolized by an upward-pointing triangle, and the divine soul, symbolized by a downward-pointing triangle, come together to form the 6-pointed star, the Star of David. This star is the great announcement of the birth of the Christ, for it is precisely from this union of the human and the divine within us that the Christ force is born, represented by the atmic body. The third shock comes with the birth of Christ within us. This divine force provides the energy that propels us to take up the great work of the second mountain, the journey toward full self-realization. The second mountain is the inner apocalypse, the complete destruction by fire of all the subhuman elements that still live within us. It is with this third shock that we overcome the second pause and gain the right to the note C, the final step before reaching the higher Do. The musical note C corresponds to the work of the second mountain. On this mountain, the solar bodies, or inner vehicles, must be transformed into pure golden vehicles, so that the Christic force may fully incarnate within the human being. It is here, on the second mountain, that the entire descent of our inner Christ into the infradimensions of the earth takes place. This descent has a single purpose: to eradicate every last shadow of the ego, to eliminate the very seeds of the ego, the 7 causal eyes. The apocalypse, in its esoteric sense, means the end by fire. It refers to the stage when our inner Christ, who, as we saw in Conference 28, is the living fire within us, carries out the complete work of psychological death. The process of annihilating the causal eyes is the third and final pause that we must face on the path toward self-realization. To overcome this third pause and reach the higher note Do, a fourth shock is required. This occurs at the precise moment when the elimination of the causal eyes, the full work of dying in oneself, has been completed. At that point, resurrection becomes possible. The initiate rises as a new being, entirely free from the ego. This triumph brings the work of the second mountain to its conclusion and opens the way to the third mountain, the mountain of sacrifice for humanity. On this third and final mountain, the master must seek out a disciple who will assume responsibility for continuing the teaching in the world, because there must always be one who preserves and transmits the knowledge on earth. In addition, the master must transmute the golden bodies into bodies of light so that the second birth may occur. Not in the physical world this time, but in the spiritual realms. At that sublime moment, the Christ unites with his Father, and the person becomes an absolute man, having attained complete and total self-realization. When a human being advances from the lower note Do to the higher note Do, it is said that they have been born a second time. This second birth is to become a risen one. This possibility is open to every human being, but it demands that we know how to perform the work and apply the 3 factors of the revolution of consciousness. Birth, the work of the first mountain, where the solar bodies are created through the recovery of the waters, through Genesis. Death, the work of the second mountain, where all psychological defects are utterly eliminated, through the inner apocalypse. Sacrifice for humanity, the work of the third mountain, where one must, before returning to the Absolute, find a disciple to carry on the knowledge in the world. The call, then, is for each of us to take up this process of ascent, to consciously apply the law of octaves, and to walk toward the supreme goal of self-realization. we have seen how the law of octaves is what ultimately guides us to fulfill the great purpose of our existence, self-realization. Yet it is not only something that operates on the grand scale of our inner path. We must also learn to recognize how this law unfolds in the details of daily life. Every day, we are confronted with different trials, and these trials, small as they may appear, are precisely what allow us to make real progress in our inner work. And within them, we will also encounter the three pauses of the octave. This means that we must learn to transcend those pauses consciously, always giving ourselves what are called shocks, or conscious impulses, in order to continue advancing. Let us consider a simple example. Perhaps we decide to dedicate a fixed time every day to studying our psychological defects through meditation. At the beginning, this intention carries us forward, but very soon we notice resistance appearing. It is our ego that immediately raises these obstacles so that we do not advance. Suddenly we feel laziness, distraction, doubt, confusion, or even ill will. And so, in order to maintain our practice, we must deliberately apply those conscious shocks, renewing our effort, remembering our goal, and regaining momentum until we overcome the pause and establish stability in that practice. If we persist and manage to overcome all these pauses, then the practice will become strong in us, and we will develop the inner force to carry it out every day with continuity of purpose. But if, in any of those pauses, we fail to apply the needed shock, then we will notice a setback. The work will weaken, and to continue again, we will have to make a double effort to recover the momentum we lost. Let us now turn to another great law that governs life in this physical world, the law of entropy. This law is also known as the law of equalization. Everything that exists in the physical realm is subject to it. For example, if we place a pot full of hot water next to another pot full of cold water, what will happen? Entropy will immediately begin its work. There will be an exchange of heat and cold until finally both pots end up with the same temperature. We can also observe this principle in another simple case. If we place one rotten fruit among a group of fresh fruits, soon the rot will spread, and the entire group will end up spoiled, equalized to the damaged one. That is what this law does. It always tends to bring things down to the lowest common level, equalizing everything to the weakest, to the lowest possible vibration. However, we must understand that the law of entropy is not only negative, it also fulfills a very important function in our inner work. It provides the resistance that we need in order to develop true strength. Think of someone who wants to develop physical strength. That person must make use of weights, of elements that resist them, because only that resistance will allow the muscles to grow stronger. In the same way, if we want to develop emotional, mental, and even sexual strength, we need to learn how to confront and overcome our weaknesses by continually rising above the degenerating pull of entropy. The problem is that very few people know how to make conscious use of this law. Most simply give up as soon as they encounter resistance. Humanity has the tendency to choose what is easy, and the easiest path is always downward. This is why millions of people are trapped on the path of entropy. Since they do not work on themselves, they gradually degenerate. Their minds become dull, their energy centers fall into deeper imbalance, and they become more and more enslaved by vices, materialism, pornography, and violence. We can observe how entropy works in ourselves in very ordinary situations. For example, when we automatically want to do what everyone else is doing simply because it is popular. We follow whatever television series is trending, we seek to imitate the celebrity who is in fashion, or we immerse ourselves in the endless pursuit of money and pleasure, just as everyone else does. Entropy also manifests when we are with friends who begin criticizing someone or gossiping, and instead of remaining conscious, we get carried away. We want to know what everyone is saying, we join in, and we add our own opinion. Another example. Perhaps we come home in a good mood, but we find that there is an argument going on among family members. Instead of maintaining serenity, we allow ourselves to be pulled into that environment. Soon, we too are irritated and furious, without realizing that the law of entropy has simply leveled us down to the same negative vibration. The great danger of falling into entropy is that we lose the very impulse we had to advance in our inner work. Once caught in its current, this law levels us, and in the end we all arrive at the same point. We go through life without having experienced a true process of liberation, without having awakened our consciousness. It makes no difference whether we have accumulated wealth, fame, or prestige. It makes no difference if, when the moment of death arrives, we are laid to rest in a coffin of gold, or if we die in poverty and are buried in a simple wooden box. In the end, both fates are the same. We all end up reduced to bones. This is how the law of entropy works. It sacrifices us all, immolating humanity in Tartarus. And we must clearly understand that the law of entropy marks everything in existence. It is present everywhere in all processes of life. We see it in the state of our planet. The seas have become garbage dumps, the rivers are polluted, and the fish are dying. The atmosphere is poisoned by smog, and the fruits of the earth are adulterated and weakened. That is the law of entropy in action. And the sad reality is that all of humanity, without exception, is heading in that same direction, downward along the path of degeneration and decline. So the question arises, how can we avoid falling deeper into entropy? How can we overcome this resistance and instead rise through higher octaves in our inner work? The answer is clear. Only through transformation can entropy be defeated. And true transformation is possible only when we are willing to sacrifice our egoic desires, because it is precisely those desires that constantly drag us into entropy. When we learn to observe ourselves and recognize which defect is acting within us, whether it be laziness, greed, lust, anger, envy, or any other impulse that weakens us and leads us into mistakes, and when we consciously work to eliminate it, then transformation occurs. This connects with what we learned in the previous conference, where we spoke about radical change. Once we have identified a defect within us, we must make the firm decision to be radical, never to feed that defect again. When we sacrifice desire, when we consciously refuse to nourish the ego, the natural result is transformation, and with transformation comes freedom. We must understand that our inner strength is trapped inside desire, and when we deny ourselves, when we renounce and sacrifice that desire, the imprisoned energy is released. That energy then becomes the strength that allows us to continue advancing firmly on the path. And the fruit of this sacrifice is always positive, because whenever we eliminate a defect, the virtue opposite to that defect spontaneously arises within us. When anger is sacrificed, the precious jewel of gentleness shines forth. When the insatiable craving for money, the unbearable greed is sacrificed, the virtue of altruism awakens in us. When envy is eliminated, then philanthropic energy is born. The pure desire to work for the good of others, along with the joy of seeing others prosper. This is why there can be no authentic transformation without sacrifice. Sacrifice is the key. And this principle also applies to the deepest aspects of our being. When a person sacrifices their uncontrolled sexual impulses, the result of that sacrifice is the transmutation of energy, and from that energy arises the creation of the existential bodies of the being. When the eyes are sacrificed, when every single one of them is destroyed, the energy that is liberated gives birth to the deep inner man. This, and only this, is the way to escape the degenerating current of entropy. But the reality is that most people do not truly want to sacrifice, because we do not really understand what sacrifice is. We must begin by sacrificing our feelings. If we carefully observe ourselves, we will discover that of all the things we cling to, the hardest to let go of, the ones we defend and nourish the most, are our sufferings. People may be willing to sacrifice their pleasures, their vices, even their money. They might sacrifice many things, but not their sufferings. Why? Because unconsciously, they love them too much. And suffering is precisely that heavy resistance that constantly drains our strength and keeps us from advancing in any aspect of life. Let us observe what happens when we are immersed in melancholy, sadness, depression, resentment, anger, or anguish. If we are sincere, we will see how we tend to indulge in those states, how we feed them with endless justifications and excuses, searching our minds for reasons to prolong them. But suffering always drags us to the lowest vibrational levels. It robs us of the strength, the spirit, and the determination to awaken our consciousness. This is why we must begin by sacrificing our feelings, our sufferings. That alone is already a great step in overcoming the law of entropy. We should never allow suffering to take root within us. We should never keep thinking about our suffering, replaying it, feeding it. When we sacrifice our sufferings, when we eradicate from within ourselves the eyes that generate them, then those sufferings die and their energy is transformed. The result is the birth of a different man or woman, someone capable of transcending the law of entropy. Before concluding, I want to add something important about sacrifice. When we sacrifice ourselves for others, when we dedicate our time and effort to helping them awaken their consciousness so that they too can transform and advance spiritually, we in turn receive great strength to continue in our own inner work. This is the reward of love. The love that we demonstrate through selfless sacrifice for humanity is returned to us as renewed energy, giving us the impulse to advance further on our own path. Let us not forget this key principle. There can be no transformation without sacrifice. And with that, we conclude today's conference. I sincerely thank all of you who have listened, and I hope this teaching helps you discover how to develop the strength necessary to do your own inner work. And as always, I warmly invite you to join us in our next conference. That upcoming talk will complement today's theme. In this lecture, we have learned how to develop strength for the work. In the next one, entitled The Permanent Center of Gravity, we will explore how to achieve a continuity of purpose, how to dedicate our entire existence to the inner work by establishing a permanent center of gravity around our consciousness. Until next time, keep working on yourself.